Years before I was born, my grandmother carried a story that stayed hidden in her heart for decades. It was not something dramatic or violent, but something quite strange and deeply unsettling. The kind of memory that follows a person for life. So today I'm here to share a personal story that is very close to my heart. Long back at the time my grandmother was pregnant with my father, her pregnancy had become difficult and her health was not doing so well. In those days, as we know, medical facilities were limited and fear often grew stronger in silence. She was constantly worried about her pregnancy, was stressed very much, and whether everything would go wrong before it could ever go right. One night, exhausted from stress and anxiety, she laid down to sleep. But what happened next never felt like an ordinary dream to her. She later described being in a strange state, not fully asleep, yet not awake. Suddenly, she felt the touch of a hand resting gently on her forehead. That touch felt real, warm, and that touch made her calm. When she slowly opened her eyes, she saw a very young woman sitting beside her in bed. The woman's head was partially covered. Her face was peaceful, almost glowing in the dimness of the room. She looked at my grandmother with calm eyes and softly said, "डर मत, सब ठीक हो जाएगा." Meaning, everything will be alright. Don't worry. My grandmother froze in fear. She wanted to move, scream, or ask who she was, but her body refused to respond. She could only stare at the woman sitting beside her. A few moments later, the woman slowly stood up, walked away, and disappeared through the balcony. Now, after some time, my grandmother finally woke up completely. She convinced herself it must be a stress, dream, exhaustion, or hallucination caused by fear during pregnancy. Eventually, she pushed the memory aside and never spoke much about it again. Years passed. My father was born healthy and alive, and life moved on. About 10 years later, my grandmother and father traveled to their maternal hometown, Nahan. It is there in hilly mountains in Himachal Pradesh, India. They stayed in an old mountain house, typically in Himachal villages, traditional in structure, slightly eerie at night. The ground floor was one large hall, while the rooms were upstairs. Outside the room was a narrow balcony with old iron grill flooring, not really meant for standing too long. Beyond the house stretched steep mountain slopes lined with neighboring homes stacked one after another. So one night, while both my father and grandmother were asleep, they suddenly woke to the sound of loud knocking. At first, they thought maybe someone nearby needed urgent help, but when they checked the time, it was far too late for visitors, around 11. Carefully, they opened the upstairs room door and stepped toward the balcony. Looking down toward the entrance, they saw a woman standing outside the house. She wore a white sari, hovering her head. The moment of my grandmother saw her, fear rushed through her body. It was the same woman. The woman slowly looked up toward them, but there was nothing. Threatening and fear in her expression, her face remained calm, almost gentle. She first looked at my father, who was at the time was preparing for his 10 boards exam, then at my grandmother. For a few silent seconds, nobody moved. Then the woman turned around and slowly began walking down the steep mountain slope. Within moments, she disappeared into the darkness. My father did not understand what just happened. My grandmother did. The face, the calmness, the white sari was the exact same woman she had seen years earlier during her pregnancy. When my grandmother later told us the story, I was very young. I listened to it like a ghost story, half scared and half fascinated. But then she said something that stayed with me forever. She looked at me and said, "तू मुझे उसकी याद दिलाती है," meaning you remind me of her. I laughed nervously, thinking she was joking, but she continued. Your face, your features, they're similar to that woman's. Maybe she was a good soul, maybe an ancestor watching over us. She came when I was afraid. She came back years later only to see that my son and I were safe. She never harmed us, and after that night, I never saw her again. Then she paused and softly said, "But every time I look at you, I remember her." So that's it. That was a true story. It might be fascinating, but it's very close to me. Thank you.